Card Player Poker Tour's most recent stop was at the luxurious Venetian Las Vegas as part of the casino's popular Deep Stack Extravaganza series. The $5,000 CPPT No Limit Hold'em main event drew a tough field of 262 players, fielding a prize pool of over $1.2 million. After 3 full days of poker action, the final table of 9 was decided. Here is a look at the chip counts heading into the final table. The chip leader was 21-year-old Alex Condon with just over $1.5 million, and he was joined at the final table by a number of recognizable names, including 2-time WPT champion Jonathan Little, 2012 WSOP Seniors Event champion Allyn Jaffrey Shulman, and respected tournament pro Dan O'Brien. All of the final 9 had their eyes on the title and the first place prize of $293,966, but with a number of short stacks, it did not take long for the chips to start flying. The first player to find himself entangled in a huge pot was 58-year-old business owner Dale Phillips. With the blinds of $5,000, $10,000 with a $1,000 ante, Alex Condon raised to $20,000. Dale re-raised to $80,000 with pocket queens. It folded over to Allyn, who gave it a moment's thought and then re-raised to $250,000 with pocket aces. Alex folded, and Dale called all in for a total of $245,000. Dale now saw that he was in bad shape with his pocket queens, having less than a 1 in 5 chance of winning the hand to double up. The flop of 10-8-7 rainbow brought no help, and after the turn and river brought another 10 and the 3 of hearts, Allyn had sealed the deal, and Dale was eliminated in 9th place, earning $31,846. It wasn't long until the next big pot arose. With the blinds still at $5,000, $10,000, Dan O'Brien raised to $20,000, and Alex Condon re-raised to $39,000 with ace-10 offsuit. Eduards Rakuss then moved all in for $140,000 with 2 black 9s. Dan quickly folded. After some thought, Alex eventually made the call. It was a flip, with Eduards holding the advantage, at least until the flop brought an ace. All of a sudden, the 33-year-old Latvian investor was down to needing one of the 2 remaining 9s or running cards to make a straight. The turn and river brought nothing, however, and Eduards was eliminated in 8th place, earning $38,583. The third big hand of the first level came when Justin Conley raised to $20,000 from under the gun. It folded back around to short-stack Peruvian civil engineer Antonio Lafosse, who moved all in from the big blind for his last $225,000 with ace-king offsuit. Justin thought for a moment before making the call with his pocket 5s. Antonio, who also cashed in the CPPT win main event earlier this year, found himself all in and slightly behind in a race situation. The flop changed nothing when it brought 2 8s and a 4. And the turn took away even more outs for Antonio as it gave Conley a flush draw as well. The jack on the river secured the pot for Justin, and Antonio was eliminated in 7th place, heading home to Lima with $45,932 for his deep run. After taking a look at the chip counts for the final 6, we saw that Alex Condon and Justin Conley had remained in the lead. Allyn Jaffrey Shulman and Dan O'Brien did a good job of building their stacks during the level as well. Jonathan Little was in the middle of the pack, but he soon found himself embroiled in a big pot. With the blinds at $6,000, $12,000 with a $2,000 ante, Jonathan raised to $25,000 from middle position with Queen 10 offsuit. It folded to Justin, who made the call in the big blind with 9-8. Justin flopped huge when the 9-8 deuce hit the board, giving him top 2 pair. He checked to Jonathan, who then bet out $25,000. Justin decided to check raise to $68,000. Jonathan made the call with his 2 overs and a gut shot straight draw. The turn brought the 4 of spades, and after some deliberation, Justin took the lead and fired out $85,000. With a current showdown value of only queen high, Jonathan reached into his stack and pulled out a raise to 210,000. Justin asked for a count of Jonathan's chips, and eventually just called. The river brought the jack of diamonds, completing Jonathan's gut shot. Justin then checked the river. Jonathan cut out a bet of 325,000, pushing it across the betting line. Justin quickly called the sizable bet, only to get the bad news that his two-pair was no good. Clearly a bit frustrated, he mucked his cards one at a time, and the huge pot was shipped to Jonathan. This hand was one of the first major turning points in the overall momentum of the final table. To get more insight into how Justin reacted to the hand and how it changed the dynamic of the table, we now turn to our team of analysts for this final table: World Series of Poker gold bracelet winner Diego Cordovez and card player publisher Barry Shulman, whose biggest title came when he won the 2009 WSOP Europe main event. Let's send it over to the guys for more.
I'm Diego and I'm with Barry. We're going to watch some pivotal hands from this tournament, see how the tournament played out. Barry, you actually played in this tournament?
I did play. I only lasted 2 days, but my wife fortunately made the last table, so that allowed me an opportunity to be there for the entire final table and watch every one of the hands that we'll be talking about today.
Yeah, this turned out to be a pivotal hand, and we've all been there where a crucial hand comes down, a big hand where you make a decision and it doesn't work out, and then you start second-guessing yourself. Right here he's in a hand against Jonathan Little, the most dangerous, most experienced player at the table, and on the turn, Justin Conley had the chance to move in, and having seen the hands afterwards, if he'd moved in he would have won a big pot. Not necessarily would it have been the best play, but as it turns out, he lost the hand, and it has to be in his head. He has to start second-guessing himself, thinking about what could have been, what should have been. So he really is in a dangerous situation where instead of starting fresh and looking at his chip stack, he's contemplating that hand and trying to recover those chips really quickly. That's the mentality.
You know, he's got to get it behind him. And normally when that type of thing happens, you come up short because there's only so many big blinds that you have. And this structure of the Venetian was unbelievable. This is the fourth day. We're at the final table. He loses a huge hand, and he still has 95 big blinds. Right. I mean, that's just unprecedented.
There are a lot of World Series of Poker tournaments where you start with 45 big blinds. And here, late in the tournament, with half the final table left, he still has double that. You can play your full game with 95 big blinds. Your options are really unlimited as far as the different moves you can make.
Absolutely. I think we all have a tendency to think too much about where we are versus average instead of where we are, how many big blinds we have.
And where we were. I mean, right
and where we could have been.
He really had a dominant chip position, and he had Jonathan Little lower where he wanted him. Now he knows that Jonathan Little's got more chips, and he's going to become a more active opponent, and that's not a good development either. Right after this hand, there were 46 hands that were played, and Justin played 17 of those hands voluntarily outside of the blinds, which is over a third of them. And of the 17 hands, he won 4 of them where he just stole the blinds and antes, and of the other 13, he won none that went to the flop. So raising that many hands, you have to presume that he was raising with a lot of weaker hands, because almost 40% of the hands obviously is a very wide range, and it's the worst possible time to do it because whether he's tilted or not, it looks like he's tilted. It looks like he's thinking about the previous hand, so other players are going to be more aggressive against him. They're not going to be giving him much credit.
Again, I was there, and look at his face here. Hand after hand, he looks like, unfortunately, kind of a beaten down person, which even if that's not true, as you say, it makes it easier for the other guys to be aggressive against him.
Yeah, and if in fact of the 13 hands, he lost at Showdown 6 times and he folded 7 times, but going 0 for 6 at Showdown means that he was sticking to hands longer than he probably normally would, and that other players were calling him down more than they normally would, and that's a direct reflection on how they're perceiving him, as you're saying. Usually when you watch televised final tables, they highlight the bust-out hands, but the reality is the bust-out hands usually just play themselves. Someone has a shorter stack and they just have to move in and get called.
Exactly. But what really matters, and this showed it terrifically, is it's the hands that lead up to that matter.
On the 46th hand dealt after losing to Jonathan, with blinds of 8,000, 16,000 with a 2,000 ante, Justin raised to 32,000 in the cutoff, holding ace-10 of clubs. Jonathan 3-bet to 78,000 in the small blind with ace-queen offsuit. Dan folded, and it was back around to Justin.
78,000.
After some thought, he moved all in for 371,000. Little quickly called and flipped up his hand, showing Justin that he was dominated. Justin's face still showed the signs of his frustration as the dealer prepared to run out the board. The Jack-Jack-8 flop brought no help to Justin. The deuce of diamonds on the turn left them drawing to 3 outs to stay in the tournament, but the Jack of clubs on the river sealed the deal. Justin was eliminated in 6th place, earning $55,118. Five-handed play began, and by the time the next break rolled around, the chip counts looked like this. Alex Condon had increased his lead, and Dan O'Brien and Anthony Zinno had slowly but surely rebuilt their stacks. By far the shortest stack was Allyn Jaffrey Shulman. To learn more about five-handed play, we turn again to Diego and Barry for their insight.
What's interesting is that at every final table, when a player goes out, the potential is there for the dynamic of the table to really change. The pay jumps get a lot bigger. In No Limit, playing five-handed as opposed to six-handed is a lot different. So after the elimination of Conley, we really saw that maybe the players' styles were going to change.
Yes, and actually what happened was there were two very aggressive people still here, and it was reasonable to assume that probably there would still be a lot of aggression at the table. And in fact, those two players were sitting to Allyn's immediate left, and she was in a predicament in that she was by far the short stack and had to wait for a good hand.
Yeah, she had Jonathan Little and Dan O'Brien at her immediate left with big stacks. Both of them had been very active, so it was reasonable for her to expect them to mix it up. So at one point she folded 18 hands in a row, and her chip stack dwindled down to 440,000. But in fact, they weren't playing very much against each other.
No, it was very interesting. It became very clear to her. She notified me. She said, these guys aren't playing because they're waiting for me to break because there's a pretty good pay jump. And so she intentionally said she was going to shift gears and start taking advantage of her image. And her image not only was someone who didn't play a lot of pots, but more conservative as a woman, more conservative as a senior. So she thought if she started being aggressive, she'd be able to buy some pots.
Yeah, it was a perfect setup for her. And in the next 11 hands, she actually reshoved 3 times, and she built her stack up to 734,000. So without even having to see a flop, she managed to almost double her chip stack. And obviously her image had really been set up in the previous round.
Yeah, it was really something amazing to see because, you know, it's one thing to be real short and open shove with a good hand. It's something else to have the table presence that you can put in a raise after they've raised and have them shove when you're short and have them fold when you're short-handed. And in fact, on the third one, somebody raised and then Anthony re-raised and then she shoved, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically said to the other guys, he looked up and said, oh, I'm supposed to be the sheriff, forget it, and acknowledged that they were waiting for her to break, and he mucked his hand.
So Allyn was able to rebuild her stack to a reasonable point, and then the most pivotal hand in the tournament for her came up. Blind versus blind against Jonathan Little. She's in the small blind, and she happens to pick up aces, which is a great piece of fortune. But he picks up 2 9s in the big blind, which is a huge hand in that situation.
Yes, and interestingly enough, she only raises to $40,000. It's the first time she doesn't move in. Here comes the flop, and she moves all in.
With a huge overbet.
Huge overbet. There's 100,000 in the pot or so, and she moves all in for about $700,000.
Right, a huge overbet, which really has to confuse them. And until this point, he was thinking that he was going to trap her, and now he's going to be wondering whether he's being trapped.
I just don't like to be calling when I have to have the best hand, and it's kind of, so what? I had the nines, I didn't raise with it before the flop. She could easily have a jack.
What's tough here is that, on the one hand, her bet being an overbet looks weak. On the other hand, the way she's played, normally you'd give her credit for a big hand, which is what she had. But he ultimately decides to call, and this changes the entire dynamic of the tournament, because now she accumulates a really big stack and takes a big chunk out of her most dangerous opponent. The ace comes on the turn, so now he's drawing dead, and Allyn doesn't have to sweat any longer. And now she has 1.4 million. She's in second place, and Jonathan Little is the short stack. And he really is someone who likes to play with a big stack, who's intimidating with a big stack. So basically everything is different now.
Exactly. Like you say, the dynamic changes every time somebody busts out. Well, somebody didn't bust out here, but the dynamic should be changing because Jonathan went from a big stack to the short stack.
The players then went on dinner break with the chip counts as follows. The blinds would increase to 12,000, 24,000 with a 3,000 ante, meaning that Alex, the chip leader, would have more than 130 big blinds, while short stack Jonathan would have roughly 17 big blinds when he came back. In the next key hand, Jonathan raised all in from under the gun for 364,000, holding pocket trays. It folded around to Alex, who gave it some thought before he moved all in to isolate from the button, holding pocket sevens. The flop of King 8 deuce all spades gave Alex a flush draw and left Little with even less equity. The 4 of hearts on the turn meant that Jonathan had just one out heading into the river. The ace of spades was not it, however, and when it hit, Jonathan was eliminated in 5th place, earning $67,367. We now turn to Diego and Barry for their analysis of the hand.
So this seemed like just a standard knockout elimination hand. Short stack has 3s, bigger stack has a middle pair, figures to be the best hand, he isolates, and he wins.
Diego, it seemed like that, except Alex took a risk that he didn't have to take, which normally doesn't cost the pot. And that is, he moved all in with his sevens. And Allyn's now in second place. If she wakes up with aces, she's going to have a huge win. He could have accomplished the exact same thing by doubling Jonathan's little bet or tripling it, and then if she moves in, he can get away from the hand.
At the next break, the 4-handed chip counts were as follows. Alex had increased his lead, now holding nearly half of the chips in play. Anthony Zinno, a 31-year-old professional poker player from Cranston, Rhode Island, would be coming back as the shortest stack, with his 560,000 amounting to just 19 big blinds at the new level of 15,000, 30,000 with a 4,000 ante. On the very first hand back from the break, it folded to Alex, who raised to 70,000 from the small blind. Anthony moved all in for 564,000 from the big blind, and Alex immediately called with ace-king, having Anthony's king-jack dominated heading into the flop, which brought 2 5s and a 4. Anthony was going to need to find a jack on the turn or river, but the deuce of spades and 6 of diamonds secured the pot for Alex and sent Anthony to the rail in 4th place with $86,964. Condon raked in the pot and increased his chip lead to $3.75 million. With the blind still at 15,000, 30,000, 29-year-old poker pro Dan O'Brien was the shortest stack, but he still had more than 35 big blinds when the next key pot arose. Dan raised to 60,000 on the button with the 8-7 of diamonds, and Allyn called from the big blind with the king-queen of diamonds. The flop brought the 10-4 deuce of diamonds, giving both players a flush, and Allyn quickly bet out 75,000. Dan raised to 225,000. Allyn then pushed out a stack of pink 25K chips to re-raise to 550,000 with her second nut flush. Dan considered his options for a few moments, then 4-bet all in for 491,000 more. Allyn went into the tank for quite a while. After figuring out exactly what the all-in amount was, and a minute more of thought, Allyn eventually called and revealed her second nut flush. clearly stunned, Dan showed his inferior flush and realized he was drawing near dead. The jack of clubs on the turn sealed his fate, and Dan was sent to the rail, earning $122,485, bringing his lifetime live tournament earnings to $2.2 million. Diego and Barry gave us their thoughts on how this hand went down.
So that was a huge cooler, and crucial for Allyn because it got her heads up with almost as many chips as Alex. She thought for a long time in a situation where most players would insta-call. She raised with king-queen of diamonds, flops the second nut flush, second nuts, and she thought for a long time before calling.
Well, I'm pretty sure that she knew that she was going to call. And even if he's got the ace-high flush, some hands you just have to lose with. But here's what she was thinking about. We have a very strong family philosophy that we like to have two ways to win, meaning be the better and have the best hand, or be able to win without a showdown. And here she has to show the best hand. And I know she likes to control her fortune, and she likes to be the decider if she's playing a big pot or not. So that's what she was thinking about. And then she knows she has to call, but she had that thought process, and she calls.
So going into heads-up play, Alex Condon had about $3.5 million in chips, and Allyn Jaffrey Shulman had about $3 million in chips. So he had 118 big blinds, she had 100 big blinds, a lot of play, an enormous amount of play really, and a pretty even matchup. And Alex Condon is not very well known because he's only 21 years old, so he only recently became eligible to play in most live tournaments, but he's got a very strong record considering his age. Twice he was the last 21 and under player, or under 21 player standing in the WPT Seminole Hard Rock main event. That's an event where you can be 18 and play. He's got a win in a $500 buy-in event, and he's got $222,000 in live tournament winnings, which again, given how few tournaments he's eligible to play, is a pretty impressive total. So going into the heads up, you talked to Allyn. What was her strategy? What was her thinking?
Her strategy is she really wanted to keep pounding it and to play lots of hands, not be risking her chips, and see whether or not he was going to play back at her. And if he didn't play back at her, she was going to just keep raising and raising and raising, which is a pretty common strategy for people who've played a lot of heads up when they're on the button. Then they raise and see what happens.
I mean, as it turns out, she raised on the button 100% of the time. 27 times heads up she was on the button, and she raised all 27. And of the 54 hands that were played, she won 44, which is a huge amount, given that there weren't a lot of hands really played out. She was just taking it on the flop a lot of times. And it wasn't just when she was in position. 27 times she was out of position, and on 15 of those, she let out into Alex. Most of those he'd raised pre-flop, so she's leading into the razor, which is kind of an unconventional strategy, but it was working. He wasn't playing back at her.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing to me too. I've never done that, frankly. I've been more of a check raiser when I have a hand and then he bets, or if I don't have a hand, then I think he has nothing. So she kind of invented this strategy, and it worked.
So all this aggression really paid off, because at the next break, Allyn had more than double Alex's chips. She had almost $4.5 million in chips, 111 big blinds. He was down to just over $2 million in chips, 53 big blinds. So without really playing out any pots or having pots go at a showdown, without any double ups, she'd reverse things from having fewer chips to having basically over double chips. Did you talk to her at break?
Yes, and he was talking to a couple people, and he has some very, very strong mentors. And there was no doubt in our mind that his mentors were going to say, look, you just have to play back at this one. You can't let her just continue to take your chips. And so basically, I said to Allyn, and she totally agreed, this jig is up. All the fun's gone. He's going to be playing back at you, so you better be prepared for that, whatever that means.
So she now had to set up to win the chips, knowing that he was going to be playing back at her.
Exactly.
So now it was more moving into more of a trapping or getting paid off mode.
Traditional.
Traditional mode. No doubt, if you're watching someone play who you're rooting for and they give up 44 out of 54 hands, you're going to tell them you need to ramp it up.
On the 59th and final hand of heads-up play, the fifth hand after coming back from the break. The blinds were 20,000, 40,000. Allyn once again min-raised from the button to 80,000 with Jack 8. Alex gave it some thought and decided to 3-bet to 255,000 with ace-queen offsuit. Allyn determined the size of the raise and made the call. The flop brought the 7 of clubs, deuce of clubs, and deuce of hearts. Alex let out for 190,000. Allyn eventually dipped into her pile of 25k chips and cut out a raise to 500,000 total. Alex slid in the call with his ace-queen high, which was still the best hand. And after pulling in the bets, the dealer burned and turned the jack of clubs, giving Allyn a pair of jacks against Alex's newly picked up flush draw. Allyn now bet 675,000. Alex went into the tank for a while, counting out his stack several times before moving all in for an additional 1,055,000. Allyn called with her pair and had Alex covered with the title and the balance. Alex needed to catch an ace, queen, or club on the river to double through, but the river was the 8 of spades. Alex was eliminated in second place for $181,278, the largest score of his young career. With that, Allyn Jaffrey Shulman secured the title of 2013 Card Player Poker Tour Venetian Main Event Champion, earning $293,966 for the win and increasing her lifetime live tournament earnings to more than $1.2 million. We caught up with her just after the win to learn more about what it meant to her.
I feel like I needed it. I needed it to prove something, because after I won the bracelet last year, people think, oh, she got lucky, or oh this or oh that, and I think when I start having more wins under my belt, then nobody can say, she just keeps getting lucky. I really worked hard, and for a long time I didn't have cards, and I just had to be very, very patient. And I think one of the strengths of my game has become that I just don't go on tilt. When something bad happens, Barry and I talk a lot about the fact that what makes somebody great is they take bad beats and then they just recover, try to recover, try not to go on tilt, try to make fewer mistakes than everybody else makes, and I feel great.
Congratulations once again to Allyn Jaffrey Shulman, the champion of the 2013 Card Player Poker Tour Venetian Main Event.